I think when you are hungry, you can't focus on anything else to not eat. It's very different than when you don't have a choice. All I thought about was that next meal.
What kept this little boy who'd already been through so much abuse and struggle and trauma going? What kept you moving forward?
Before I knew God, God knew me.
How does that affect you as you continue to progress through your life?
I think so much of this is understanding not just how our behavior manifests within us, but how our behavior influences and impacts others.
Or if it's been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence, how would you like yours to read?
Setbacks are inevitable, but failure is not an option.
Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. When I was 9 years old, I was brought into an emergency room with burns on 100% of my body. And the way they figure out mortality is they take the percentage of your body burned, they add your age, and they figured out now what mortality is. Meaning, this kid in 2025 has a 109% likelihood of dying. No chance. And yet, as unlikely as it is for me to be with you on this podcast episode today, the gentleman I'm seated across from in our Live Inspired John O'Leary studios, his life, his persona, his family, his business is far more unlikely than my life. His life and his presence is evidence of miraculous grace, love, but also an awful lot of personal courage. You're going to hear that story. You're going to want to hear more about that story. You're going to probably do what I did. I don't recommend starting this book in the evening because you will not fall asleep. The name of the book is Twice Over a Man. I read it starting yesterday, finished early this morning, Orv. I was mad at you at about 3:15 when I finally got through the final page, wiping my eyes and my heart fluttering with hope. So without further ado, I'm going to loop in my friend, and that's who this guy is, soon to be yours. His name is Orv Kimbrough. Orvin, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
John, thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to the conversation, brother.
You heard me share this long-winded intro talking about 37 years ago, O'Leary getting burned and he shouldn't live and you shouldn't live and you've got a business and you've got an unlikely past. When you walk into a boardroom or an airplane or a coffee shop, meeting someone for the first time and you extend your hand and they shake yours and they say, Orv, tell me about you. How do you respond to that?
Generally, I respond with, I'm a foster kid. And that blows people's mind, particularly if they already know that I'm the CEO of one of the largest banks in Missouri. But I start with, I'm a foster kid. And if I really want shock value, I may say I'm a 1%er. And if you think about just that concept, that's a trigger word. I'm a 1%er. And then I go on to say less than 3% of kids who age out of the foster care system will go on to college. They will less than 3%, and less than that will actually persist and graduate college. So that's 1%. And so that starts the conversation. And why that's important is because what you see in that moment, when I walk in that boardroom, you see somebody who is seemingly accomplished, who has seemingly arrived. But each and every day I'm arriving. I'm a foster kid.
It's awesome. You are a 1%er, but I think you're cheapening the math. I don't think it's even 1% likelihood of you graduating, let alone running this $3 billion business and doing so humbly. So I'm going to go back a little bit in time. We're going to go back from the Mizzou Tigers band playing on the football field and all the other experiences, man. You talked about being a foster kid, but before you were a foster kid, you were a fatherless child, first growing up in East St. Louis.
Yeah.
So I just want to talk about your earliest days, man. You and I have the exact opposite past.
Yeah.
My parents remained together. The foundation of my family is so firm. I don't know if I heard a curse word growing up. I'd never been abused, never been sexually abused, never been physically abused, never been yelled at. Yeah. I've been encouraged. I'd had stern warnings, but I'd never experienced anything at all. And then I read your story and I read a man who went through things I can't fathom. I don't know how you pulled through it. So let's talk first of all about your childhood, starting in East St. Louis.
I was born in East St. Louis in 1974. And the only thing that I know about East St. Louis is that I was born there. And I grew up in North City. I never knew my father. My mother died when I was 8 years old. She was 28, 29. She died of complications from drug and alcohol abuse. Life was extraordinarily tough as a young person. The environment that I came up in was a challenged environment. I experienced some horrible things as a kid. When I was 5 years old, I was sexually abused. I was physically abused throughout life. I was emotionally abused, and all of this trauma that I experienced as a kid stays with me today.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the residue of it is with me, and so each day I get up and choose to give it one more day.
Right. In the book, as I'm flipping pages, there's a guy who hangs in my office behind us named Henry Nouwen. One of his quotes is, "What is most private and personal is most universal and applicable." So these stories that you were writing about in the book, I remember thinking, I can't believe this dude is sharing this with me. And then I'm turning the page. Like, forward, man. I'm going to learn more about this guy. Why? What was it about your life story that you realized, man, I want to share things, details that many of us would hide from our own kids about our past, but I want to share it with strangers around the world. You talked about the sexual abuse at age 5. You went into detail about this. Why tell strangers about the difficulties you faced?
Well, when I engage with, I spend a lot of time with people at all economic levels, but I spend a lot of time with professionals who are accomplished. And when I engage with them in the private moments and we're talking and I share, they share. For me, it's a healing process. For them, it's a healing process. When you let the things that bind us up go, great things happen in your life. I think that on the other side of that, you start to thrive. And so often the world suggests to us that the deepest, the darkest, the most painful things that happen to us are private. And they tear us up on the inside because they are so private. But when we open up and we let other people in and we say, that thing that happened to me does not define me. It's a part of my story, but it is not my story. That's a powerful thing, John. That's a powerful thing. So when I open up, it's about just a rawness and a realness and an authenticity that said, I went through all of that, but here I still stand.
Right.
And it gives you license to do the same. It gives you license to take that next step in your journey. When you open up, you start to heal.
Yeah.
You let air in.
You write a bit, and I know it's even more than a bit of your experience about hunger. Years ago on Good Friday, I decided one of my roommates at the time, he's back in college actually, he fasted on Good Friday. So from sunup to sundown, he just didn't eat anything all day long, and he just wanted to experience hunger pain. That might be the only time in my life I experienced what it's like to be at lunchtime without food already, to start having a migraine about 2:00, to be gutted by like dinner time, and to go to bed feeling unbelievably miserable, hoping that tomorrow morning I could wake up and have a real day. That was one day sacrificially lived out to give thanks to God for the grace in my life. One day I've been hungry. You grew up in hunger, man. For our listeners, many of them have no idea what I experienced for one day, let alone what you experienced for childhood. What's it like to be hungry?
I think when you are hungry, you can't focus on anything else but the hunger. I worked in the charitable sector for a lot of years at United Way, and there would be these awareness efforts where organizations would do sleep outs, where you sleep out on the concrete overnight, or you go without eating, beyond fasting, you go without eating just to see what it's like.
Yeah.
When your environment is not one where you are hungry, where you are choosing to not eat, it's very different than when you don't have a choice. I mean, when I was hungry, that's the only thing that I focused on, and it was my obsession. So going to school was a challenge. Staying focused was a challenge. all I thought about was that next meal. And for me, that next meal sometimes came from the garbage can in the alley. That next meal often came from the school cafeteria where they threw food out at the end of the day. So exercises that are about manufacturing something so that you can experience it are meaningless to me, because there are people out here right now who are hungry.
Yes.
And when you are hungry, you are unoptimized. It's all you focus on.
Right.
Like, I just want to eat. And so how does that play out for me today? I can eat pretty much anywhere I want to eat. And my wife will remind me, well, sweetie, you don't have to buy 3 meals when we're out. I'll still buy 3 meals, even though I can only eat 1 meal. And I'll box those meals up and I'll take them with me. And sometimes the meals waste. But I know that that's the residue from that hunger.
How did your mother pass away? Tell me about Caroline's death.
Yeah. So my mother was a chronic user of drugs and alcohol. She was a chronic abuser of drugs and alcohol. And one morning when I was 8 years old, I awoke because I was hungry. And I went over to the refrigerator to see what there was to eat, only to find a box of saltine crackers. And I went over to my mom, who was asleep in the other room, to ask her if I could eat the crackers. We had to ask for food. And I began to shake my mother, and she didn't respond. I continued to shake her, and still she didn't respond. When the paramedics got there, they pronounced her dead.
Yeah.
And yeah, it rocked our world. We didn't know family back then. We had no family. My mother was an only child. The only thing we had was us, and even us was rocky. Even us was rocky. So she died, and we ended up in the foster care system.
If my mother died, my dad was there. If they both died together, I had 2 grandparents on my father's side, 2 on my mother's side. My mother has a sister who is still incredible, Aunt Janie. My father has 5 siblings. All of them would have taken us in. You don't have any of this natural network. I think you go 3 kin away before you find the next of kin. You go into what described it as a green and yellow house. Is that right? The big green and yellow house down the street.
Yeah, the big green and yellow house at 2849 Simple in North St. Louis. And when I looked at that house, it was a mansion, but it wasn't.
Is it still standing?
It's down. It's that whole area is abandoned and vacant now. I go once a year to drive the street as if I'm that kid who just lost his mother, driving down the street in the police cruiser.
Yeah. Aunt Shirley peeks her head through the doorway. Describe Aunt Shirley just physically first, then we'll talk about the way she raised you.
So Shirley was my cousin. Her mom was our great aunt. Shirley was this imposing figure. Think about Big Mama. And whatever image pops in your head when you see Big Mama, that was probably Shirley. And so Big Mama everybody's Big Mama is always oversized in every which way, oversized in terms of physical appearance, oversized in terms of personality and presence. Shirley was oversized, and I was a little boy. And so she welcomed us into the home, and I found out that she was our cousin, and that Aura, her mother, was our aunt. And there we were, trying to figure out what next. What's the next move?
Take us through that. Because one of the quotes I wrote down is, you wrote, "Fear and loneliness were constant companions to me after my mother's death."
So the fear started immediately because when you don't have the extended family that you spoke about, you don't have people there who's got your back, who are looking out for you. I was 8.
Right.
It's hard for me to look out for myself at that point. So the fear began immediately upon mom's death. The fear continued as we rolled down the street in the police cruiser. The fear accelerated, escalated when we knocked on the door, the racing heartbeat as we stepped in over the threshold into the house, and then over the next week or two, the discussions back and forth about who was going to keep these orphan kids. Shirley ended up keeping us. Shirley didn't have kids of her own. Shirley had relatives, nieces and nephews that she loved dearly. Shirley was overwhelmed with us. Shirley beat the hell out of us.
Yes.
Daily. So the fear was there, and we were lonely because it was rare that anybody checked in on us. We were alone.
I didn't understand that fully because she has family. You mentioned the word church. You mentioned the word neighbors. There's people who are aware of your existence and seemingly care broadly about you. And yet they're also vaguely aware of the abuse, the yelling, the torture that you little ones are enduring at the hands of this big mama. She is beating the crud out of you, and it is obvious, and no one steps up.
No, nobody steps up because I think when we think about generosity, the very fact that she did anything for us, she was generous. And so when we detach generosity from like seeing one's humanity, it's a problem.
Right.
So I think people said she's generous. She took in these 4 orphan kids. Who else will take them in? And if in your mind, you have already said, look, that's too much. And so the vast majority of the world will say, that's too much. She is being generous. And when you perceive someone as being generous, you turn a blind eye to the things that are less generous. Oh, they'll get through. They're better off. This could be so much worse.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that, John. When we look at situations, we say, well, it could be worse. She's beating the hell out of us.
Yes. We won't unpack it in the podcast. The book describes some of the abuse that she took out on you. Something else I didn't fully understand is she was capable of love and joy and sweetness and kindness and cooking it up for others, except those people did not live in her house. They were the ones who visited. They were the cousins who would come in town for a couple of days, and life was awesome. It was buoyant. It was joy-filled. They would leave, the door would shut, and life would return to the misery that you knew. Explain to me that.
So that happens in real life. Now, with Shirley, this was, just the trauma was significant. But in real life, how often is it that we treat the ones who are closest to us like crap? The ones who are proximate to us like crap, our wives like crap. We don't show that love for our children, but yet when we step out into the world, it's a different facade.
Right.
And so I don't know, John. I'm only processing this literally right now with you. I'm processing this right now with you. I could not understand at that time why, when other people came, her whole disposition changed. And so for me, the only thing that I could say is, or that I felt was, it must be us.
Yeah.
It must be me. Because everybody else that I see her engaging with on the outside world, it's her perfect engagement.
Yeah.
And we were the imperfect engagement.
You wrote in the book that you were unexpected, unwanted, and unloved. Those three things are true.
Yes.
Unexpected, for sure. Unwanted, clearly. Unloved. Look, there's proof everywhere around you. So then I'm curious. I was expected, wanted, and loved, which gave me the courage to keep moving forward through storms. If you feel as if you're not, and you know, lowercase k, but you know that you're not, man, you're not wanted in this room, in this house, in this life. What kept this little boy who'd already been through so much abuse and struggle and trauma going? What kept you moving forward?
I think before I knew God, God knew me. The only thing that I could connect to say what kept me going, because as an adult, when I step outside of myself and I look at everything that I went through and how it still shapes me today, the only thing that I know to be true is it had to be God. And as I aged, it became, that's either going to cripple me, that's going to anchor me, or it's going to accelerate me. I get to choose.
Right.
I get to choose. And so for me, I chose to take all of that unexpected, unwanted, unloved, and harness it, and to channel it into something more productive, not just for me, but for other people. But we get a choice. But before that choice, something else has to work in you. When you don't have people who are speaking different than those three things that we're talking about, it has to be God. You know, in your book, you talk about Viktor Frankl and how he went through horrible things and he lost the original manuscript, and he was feverishly trying to pull all of this back together, and that gave him purpose and meaning.
Yeah.
I think it's so true, brother.
So he had years of psychological research, family, structure, strong faith as a foundation from which he could not only level set, but launch forward from.
Mm-hmm.
You had nothing, dude.
Yeah.
And you're in a broken school system, and you return to an abusive home, and you're hungry, and you have welts on your back and wrist and bottom. Like, what kept you going?
So I often ask, what created the universe from nothing?
As a child, you were wondering this?
Yeah. So what created the universe from nothing? God. God created the universe from nothing. And so even when I had nothing, I had something. I could not place definition around that something until years later, but it was God. I mean, there is no other way. There's no other way to describe it.
Right.
Because each time I wanted to give up, I had a voice, keep pushing.
Shirley, who is your tormentor, Big Mama, eventually has a stroke. She goes off. She lives for a long time afterwards, but you're not under her thumb, her care anymore. When that happens, even before you find out where you're going next, how did you feel? Like, as a little kid, this woman who is radically abusive fades, and I'm just wondering how you felt about that moment.
I was sad that this imposing figure, this dominant personality, I still loved her. I still loved her, John. I still loved her. I'm sad. I still loved her. Even in all of that.
When you know someone's story, it's almost impossible to hate the person across from you. And I think if you and I met in a different life, in a different space, it's possible you would not like me and I would not like you. And then you read my book, I read yours. I know your heart. And man, I love you. When you walked in here, I gave you this oddly long hug because I'm like, dude, I love your heart. And you have to wonder what it is that Shirley went through that made her the woman she became and allowed her to treat kids the way she treated them, including yourself, because there's a story there. And when you know the story, it's hard for you to hate the person who is portraying it.
So I have learned that through the years. I never knew and still don't know Shirley's story. But boy, like when I slow up and as I push through sort of anger, I can be sad and angry all at the same time. And I realized that, she's God's children too. Mm. Yeah, it's hard to dismiss people when you actually pause and see them. Even if you're manufacturing the story probably wasn't a good story. Hurt people.
Always. Shirley has the stroke. These 4 kids that she's taking care of begin to find their own way forward. How old were you when that happened?
I was 15, 16 years old.
Talk about Annie Malone's orphanage, this home for children.
Yeah, that was the first group home that I attended after Shirley's death. Immediately after, I moved down the street with a neighbor, and that was really just a tough situation. Kids can be so cruel, and they were. And I don't blame. I don't blame the kids for the cruelty. It's just the nature of kids. And so I decided to go to Annie Malone, and Annie Malone, it's a group home. One of the things that I often opine on is, group homes are intended to be safe places for kids, and they do the best that they can, but they're not homes. They're not, the home that you lived in with your mom and your dad. And it's an institution.
Right.
And so it was an institution, and it did the best that it could for all of the kids who were there. But people had shifts and they went home. Annie Malone, one of the biggest things that I took away from Annie Malone was they opened my eyes to St. Louis in a different way.
Yeah,
I got to see people. I got to see professionals. I got to see business leaders. I got to see board members. I got to see. That was the first time I recall going to a Cardinals baseball game, going to the Muni. So I was exposed, which was good.
It's way good. A couple things showed up, and as I read through that part of the story, you start being exposed to not only the Muni and the zoo and St. Louis Cardinals, St. Louis University Billikens, Erwin Claggett. You get experienced also with the point system.
Yeah.
Which you'd never received to that point in your life. And it's not perfect. I'm not sure what is this side of eternity, but this gave you, maybe for the first point in your life, like an inflection point where you recognize, if I do this, that happens. If I do this, that happens. I choose this then.
Right.
Talk about the point system.
So the point system, the point system was almost the immediate, what do you call it? So you do something,
yeah,
you get a reward, or you get dinged.
Yeah. Stick and carrot, man, right away.
The stick and carrot. That's it. It's immediate. Now, I'd always learned and understood that for every choice, there's a consequence, but the point system made it like real time. It's like a real time thing. So at Annie Malone and at most group homes, if you did good things, you were rewarded. If your behavior slipped, they took away privileges. And that to me was like that. So John, here's the thing. That was the first game I learned. So like the point system was a game, and I look at the point system, and then I look at college later, it's all a big game. And then I look at the work world, it's all a big game. So I haven't even reflected on this in this way, but the first gamification of life was the point system. That's what it is.
Man, so one of the things you wrote while you're talking about the point system is that you were dealing, rightly so, with an awful lot of aggression, anger, man. Right. That makes all the sense in the world. And you learn during this time how to turn that aggression into passion. Still that temperament, that tension, but one leads toward evil, one leads toward good if it's done right.
Yeah.
That's a complicated thing. Like most of our listeners are struggling with that one, man.
Yeah.
How do you begin doing that as a teenager? And then how does that affect you as you continue to progress through your life?
So I think so much of this is understanding not just how our behavior manifests within us, but how our behavior influences and impacts others. And so at that time, in the group home setting, if one kid is set off, generally it's like it's almost like everybody's set off.
It's like dogs barking, man. Once you hear your neighbor's dog, you're like, oh, here comes mine, dude.
Everybody's set off. And so you have to sort of understand how your behavior impacts others. And for me, I was an angry kid, but when you go into an environment where most of the kids are angry, boy, that's volatile. And I got into a fight within the first week. And then I realized, boy, I can't live like this. And in fact, my anger issue pushes people away. So now think about not just the confines of Annie Malone, but think about what was happening in school, where I had counselors and teachers and other people who were trying to draw near, and anger pushed them away. And so I had to figure out, well, how do I take this anger thing and use it for my good? Because if it's in me, that means it is supposed to help me.
Yeah.
And if it's in me, it's not supposed to repel people. And so for me, I figured there is a distinction between anger and passion, but it's slight. And so how do I take all of this rage and just translate it differently? I'm passionate about certain things. So when these feelings started to rise up in me, I have to be slower to speak. I have to channel that energy productively, and then it comes out as passion. And that's the same thing that happens today.
Yeah.
Think about the people who are on fire, right? You want to be around people who are on fire.
Yes.
Like, they're not lukewarm. They are passionate. And no matter how they get to that passion, that's what you want. And so for our listeners, we all have anger in us. There's not a person I have met who hasn't been pissed off about something. But how do you channel that into productive energy? It serves you better.
That's right.
It draws people closer.
Did you have a teacher, coach, counselor during those years, 15, 16, 17, as you're moving toward Mizzou, which is a remarkable story? We'll talk about it. Then we'll start putting a bow on all this. But was there a guide that saw within you potential that you did not yet see within yourself?
So I had so many people. I think about Miss Kennedy, my high school counselor, who this African-American woman, much older, took me on my first job interview at Schnucks Market. Miss Kennedy, who took me by her condo, as before I even knew what a condo was, and gave me backpacks of clothes and food. Miss Kennedy, who constantly challenged me to not give in to the anger, to do something different with it. Miss Kennedy, who was the invisible hand at the job interview, who went in before me and essentially greased some palms so that I got the job at Schnucks. Miss Kennedy, who always told me that you can do whatever it is you want to do. So when you ask that question, Miss Kennedy, for me, was that person. I mean, and I had lots of people in my life who came in and out. But Miss Kennedy, I think about Dewan Robinson, who he worked at the YMCA. He was a director, but before he was a director there, he was a supervisor at Annie Malone, who during the 16, 17, 18 years old, he got me even more conscientious. Hey, we need to march to take the streets back.
Right.
And you don't need to be in the streets. So anytime you want to come and hang out at the YMCA, it's a free pass. Because it used to cost, I think it was $3 or $4.
Real money.
That's real money. That's real money. So those people poured into me in ways that I can't even begin to explain or even appreciate.
When I became a board member for Big Brothers Big Sisters, and I know you're hugely involved in various parts of our community, several boards, one of the questions they walked us through was, what do you do when you get a flat tire? And we all agree, you call AAA, of course. Then you call your admin, maybe get an Uber to pick you up while you wait because you don't have time for this. And then they said, what maybe did your parents do? And so, well, would they have changed the tire? Because that's what they would, of course, have done. And the point ultimately became, do you know what our people do? The people we serve, the population we serve. If they're fortunate enough to have a car, and that is a huge if they have a car, it is highly unlikely that they are going to have a change of a tire in the back of that thing. So when they get a flat tire, it's not how do they change it? They know they're not. So it's on the side of the road. That means now they're going to be late for that job at Schnucks you referenced a moment ago. That late for the job at the fast food joint. That means everything they built their life on begins crumbling because of a flat tire that you're a phone call away from redeeming, board members. A click away in your app from taking care of. And it was this painful reality of how different my life is than the people whose lives I was having the opportunity and the honor of beginning to try to serve a little bit. I was reminded of that as you're getting ready to go off to Mizzou. Mm-hmm. I went to St. Louis University, and it just wasn't a thing. I guess I filled out some forms, but it wasn't that complicated. I made it in. It wasn't that hard. My mom and dad dropped me off. They hugged me goodbye. They got back in their car with a flat tire, not yet flat. Like everything was smooth. Or your experience going down to Mizzou, you had basically a trash bag with your belongings, no credit card, no cash, no chance. That's why I began the podcast 4.5 hours ago with the statement, dude, I should not be here, but the only person less likely to be in this boardroom with me is you. Mm-hmm. Just talk about some of the things you overcame to move yourself, man, because that's what's happening. You are moving yourself into MIZZOU on a college campus. It's highly unlikely. 3% of kids in foster care move in, less than that graduate out.
But so the fact that Mizzou even accepted me was incredible. There was so much persistence that went into trying to convince them that I was worthy. I was worthy of taking a risk on. When I packed up my bags and traveled the highway west going to Mizzou, I was energized. And when I saw the campus, I was like, oh my God. Now, I had seen a college campus before because you mentioned Claggett. So when I was in high school, I was a physical therapy major. So I got to hang out with the SLU basketball team and wrap ankles and stuff. So so I seen college, but Mizzou, oh my God. And I got there and I didn't necessarily know what to expect. I was just expectant.
Yeah.
And the week that I got there, I went to the financial aid office, and at that time they were recruiting African American students pretty heavily. That was their largest recruiting class up to that point of Black students. And I assumed that I was going to get some aid. I was a foster kid. I didn't have money. I didn't have parents. And when I got into the financial aid office, they essentially said I didn't qualify because I came in on academic probation. What do you mean I don't qualify? And in my mind, John, immediately I went to, oh my God, I'm going to have to find a ride back to St. Louis. And so I didn't have anybody to call and say, okay, now help me problem solve this. Help me think this through. In fact, from filling out the FAFSA to getting there, it was me trying to figure that out by myself. When, my kids, we got them. We are their navigational partner.
Right.
We are helping to equip them to be prepared. And so the short of the story is I did not get A, and I had to figure college out. And, everything from the first day being there, Shirley's sister showed incredible kindness to me. She took me to Walmart. She bought me some things, and I saw her one other time after that in my 4 years. But I applaud her for that one incredible kindness, because it helped to launch me. But I had to figure it out. I had to figure college out. And I had a fraternity brother who called me the other day, and we were talking about my brother, who has recently died. And this fraternity brother, we were 17, 18, 19, 20 years old when we met. And he says, or I never understood you. And I told my wife, we were line brothers. He said, he told my wife when we met that Orphaned is going to push you away. He is not, one to draw close to, even when you draw close to him. And he said, I didn't really understand as a 17, 18, 19-year-old boy what you were going through. You were on an island.
Right.
I had my parents, my grandparents. You were trying to navigate this thing by yourself. I said, Marv, I was. And I had to do everything in my power to stick. And that meant I had to be different. I could not show up the way other kids showed up. I was paying for my own education. So, John, in all of this, here's the lesson. So for me to get to college, I had to reframe my thinking. Everything up to that point suggested that I would not go to college. I was statistically not supposed to be there. Just as you said earlier, I'm statistically not supposed to be sitting here. Reframing your thinking is about what is it that you are supposed to learn?
Right.
And as you learn, you have to take personal agency. What is it that I'm supposed to do? When I was in college, when I got there, I was supposed to do the things that were going to keep me there, which meant there were a lot of things that I couldn't take risk on. Think about your college days. I read your book.
Brother, this is not your time to flip the mic on me, man. I get to interview you. The light is all on you today, Orv.
So I had to take personal agency, and there were choices. And so when I was on the college campus, I went up there with the plastic bag, but then I said, I flunked out our first semester. I flunked out. And then I said, okay, the third piece to this is network, your social network.
Right.
Rename your social network. Give everybody a purpose in your network. If they are in your network and they are not aligned to the vision. So for me, the vision was come hell or high water, I'm walking out of here with a degree. Why? Because I wanted to live a life different than my mom and dad. And I needed that degree. And so I drew near to professors after I got back in. Boy, I love my Mizzou professors. Loved them. I drew nearer to certain people on campus who were forming. And I put my head down and I did the work.
Whew. So on your birthday, you graduate from Mizzou. Congratulations. You get the diploma. We could spend an awful lot of time talking about that first semester, fighting your way to get back in, striving, the fraternity, the lessons learned, pleather jackets at parties.
Well, your mind is like I don't think I don't think I've met anybody sharper. I'm serious.
Oh, I hope you meet some better friends than me soon, or if it's time for to elevate, man. It's time for you to elevate.
You don't even have notes in front of you.
I read your book so recently. It will always be with me.
Yeah.
I think I want to talk about jobs.
Yeah.
And what they taught you.
Yeah.
You got a long resume.
Yeah.
You got a distinguished resume now, but it started off relatively humbly.
Yeah.
And rather than talking about shoveling snow, which teaches lessons, and cutting grass, which teaches lessons, I think the first real job, what did working at JCPenney's teach you about leadership?
It taught me first, you remember, you go back to anger versus passion. Be passionate about what it is you're selling. And I was a top salesperson. It taught me customer service. Like, how do you engage with people? How do you have a real conversation?
Yeah.
Like, we need to have more of this kind of training today. How do you just sit and just see people and understand what their needs are, and then match their needs to the opportunities? I mean, that's what it was, hugely customer service. But then the other thing that Penny's taught me, I had a manager. Boy, he spoke into my life. I mean, he told me once, he said, you can get an MBA in JCPenney. You can go all the way.
Yeah.
It's the first time in a professional setting that somebody told me I could go all the way. It wasn't the last time, but it was the first time. You can go all the way. What does all the way look like for you? You can go all the way. You have to do these things and you can go all the way. He didn't place limits on it. He did not place limits on it. And so for me, incredible. So in my mindset, I can go all the way. John, I'm not done yet. Neither are you, brother.
For this kid, I mean, I'm just so moved by that. This kid from East St. Louis and then North St. Louis, without a dad, without a mom, without an aunt who loves him, unwanted, unexpected, unloved, to have the ability to go all the way. That is big news.
Brother, for me, it was transformative. And so he, that internship, he said, hey, you can do the management training. They offered me a job. It was the first time that in my life that I was at this crossroad, and I made a significant life choice. I said, you know what? I don't want the job. I'm going to go all the way. My mission is to help people. My mission is to create conditions to help people live better lives.
Right.
I knew back then that was my mission. I said, I did social work, got an undergraduate degree, master's degree in social work, and I was going to go all the way in that way.
Popeyes. It's one of my kids' favorite restaurants, man. I had to ask. This is a question for Jack, Patrick, and Henry O'Leary, who love Popeyes chicken.
Now, Lee's Chicken is my place now. I'm just telling you, right?
What did working the fryer at Popeyes teach you about leadership?
Well, I think about hard work. Working at Fryer was hard work. I was a greasy mess at the end of every shift.
Yeah.
But guess what? I got up and I went again every shift until I decided that I wanted to do something different.
Eventually, I'm going to fast forward just a little bit past degrees and diplomas and advanced degrees. United Way. And I know you spent a lot of time there and had just about every job within the organization. But what did that organization teach you about leadership?
It taught me about the power of connection. It taught me that leaders connect. It taught me about the importance of platform. Leaders have platforms. It taught me about the value of focusing on others. Leaders focus on others. When you pour into others, when you connect, when you are relational, great things happen. All good things that have happened to me have always happened to me on the other side of the right relationship.
In that same vein, while you were working at the United Way, I'm assuming that's when the story happened. You are in Ladue. You are in front of a woman who grew up wealthy, is wealthy. For those who aren't familiar with our community, Ladue is one of the wealthiest zip codes in the country, let alone St. Louis. And this white woman is explaining to you how to fix poverty, how to fix racism, and then even saying to you essentially, and you don't even understand what I'm talking about, do you, Orv? Like, so when you are at this table, being lectured at.
Yeah.
It's a relationship. It's something you have to listen to, I guess. But how do you listen with grace when someone is pointing at you from a perspective you completely disagree with and you know that they're wrong? How do you do that?
You listen. You honor their perspective, and you share your perspective. For me, I got that a lot. I still get that. I listen. I honor their perspective. And then I share my perspective and I keep it moving. My lived experience, I've seen it all. I've seen more than the average person. I've been at the very bottom and I've been at the very top. And I've been everywhere in between. I listen to people and I try to honor who they are. And I try to understand your perspective. Just because you are doing work in a particular area doesn't make you the authority on that area. And so even when we as a financial institution engage with people who have little means, we want to see them. In foster care and with foster kids, we say nothing about us without us. Nothing about us without us. And so for me, it is always about just listening and just say, okay, I heard you. I honor you. And here is my perspective. Here is my story. We all have something to contribute. I don't get combative when people are really trying to diminish, because that's what it is. It's a diminishment. We want to diminish your lived experience. John, I can't tell you anything about your life. Not a thing. Your story is your story, uniquely yours. Your journey is uniquely yours, brother. Can't nobody tell you about your life. And the same for me.
So we're going through some of the roles you've had on the resume you've been working on. It's an impressive one. I love the fact that this kid who has no reason at all to even graduate high school goes on to college, gets a master's and then another, and ultimately is an adjunct professor at one of the finest institutions in the country called Washington University. Blows my mind, dude. What has teaching at Washington University taught you about leadership?
Teaching at Washington University has been one of the greatest joys of my life. When I was younger, I would go to the WashU campus to study because I felt like it made me smarter. That's crazy. Like that is like crazy just to go there, just to hang out. It made me smarter, but it's all about proximity.
I love that you use that word a bunch in the book. Proximity. It's a great term.
And so the fact that I went on to teach a bunch of years and did the Defining Moments series, and wow, like it says to me that when you commit yourself wholly to a craft, to a field, to learning,
right,
all things are possible. And so at WashU, I taught students who had graduate degrees. Think about that. So
I hope our listeners are folding the laundry right now, like trying to do two things. Because if they are, they're missing the one thing. There's no world in which this kid in front of me is teaching Washington University students and leaders anything. Oh. And yet here it is. Mind blowing.
That's right. Your story is uniquely your story. Your journey is uniquely your journey. We all have something of value to contribute. I love WashU. I love the experience. And I have students from across the world who I still engage with. Yeah. They say, well, Orv, your leadership courses are like therapy session for leadership. I actually was listening to you actually do a little bit of therapy for leadership too, which is crazy, right?
If you love people, you're doing therapy for leadership. It's all the same work. So 3 more job titles I'm intrigued by on your resume in no specific order. The role of husband, a role you never saw modeled in front of you as a kid. It's on your resume now. It's been on there for a while. What is the role of being a husband taught you about leadership?
So it's taught me patience. It's taught me teamwork. It's taught me the importance of collaboration. It's taught me the importance of going through hard things and not just sticking. You know, when COVID happened, my wife and I weren't sure we were going to make it. We weren't sure. And we did a lot of hard work to come out on the other side stronger as a unit. And teams sometimes are forged through the fire.
The role of dad. It's my favorite job. You had no idea what it looked like to be a dad outside of, you know, you mentioned watching Bill Cosby occasionally as a kid and some television shows, and maybe a couple of your buddies had a dad in their life. But for the most part, you had no idea what this looked like, what it felt like. What does being a dad taught you about leadership?
It taught me that leadership is about coaching, you know, and coaches, the greatest coaches, they love their players. And you coach the best when you show up, and everything that you are trying to instill, you are doing it in love. And it's received when you are doing it in love. You know, so I'm dad coach. And every leadership role has a bit of coach in it.
Yeah.
Because you are trying to help the person on the other side optimize. You're trying to help them actualize. You're trying to help them go to the next level. You're trying to help them become the version of themselves that they can be most proud of.
Yes. Final question before we shift gears into what we call the Live Inspired 7. You now have this role of being an author. And I'm grateful for it. I'm not, my eyes aren't, because they're tired right now looking at you. Their bags formed fully underneath them. But not only are you an author, you're a gifted one. You're a poet, man. I didn't know that about you until I read your book. You can write poetry. Yeah. What has becoming an author and sharing your heart with friends, family, spouse, kids, and strangers alike taught you about leadership?
It's taught me the importance of sharpening our thinking. The more I write, the more I read, the more I talk to people like you, and I get perspective on what the words mean to you. It goes back into my mental Rolodex, and I'm sharpening my focus as leaders. One of the things that I think is so important is that we not be a leader of one book. There's somebody said that quote, be well read. And so being well read is not just about the book, it's about the people that you spend time with, and you know, taking into account their counsel and what they are receiving. So,
right.
What it is you write. This book, I had a business guy, John, who called me up, a very prominent business guy. He sent me a text message. He said, "Hey, I'm reading your book, and I'm going to put it down, and I'm going to come back to it at the end of the week." And this was a Sunday. Then he texted me a few hours later. He said, "I finished the book. Can we have breakfast?" And I said, "Sure." Man, this is a leader who doesn't do that. I said, "Sure." He said, "You got a story, and it's a powerful story, and you ought to be thinking about this. You ought to be thinking about this, and you ought to be thinking about this." And I said, "I am, and I'm moving at the pace at which I can move and still run a bank."
And a family and a life. Yeah. So I don't know who you're meeting with. I'm sure we'll talk about it once this microphone cuts off. Yeah. But I think that person's right. And I think the person he was speaking to is also right. You're moving at the pace you can. And it is the pace of life right now, man. You're doing well. Is there anything you have? We have the books in front of us. Is there, whether it's a poem, a passage, anything from the book that you want to share with our listeners and viewers?
Yeah, I'll read the last poem. And this poem is the only poem that I wrote specifically for this book. Everything else was written teens, early 20s, 30s.
Okay.
Right? It's called Twice Over a Man. Here I stand at last, more than twice over a man. Fear is no longer the dominant cast, though still prominent in the plan. The plan has been survive, forgive to reach 28 was ideal. Each year that takes me past that point can be professed as surreal. It's surreal that I forgave. After all but hope had been taken away, my development was surely delayed. I coped without notice of the spirit dwelling within, fortifying my position and belief, subduing grief, making faith my friend. The plan was significance, not just to outlive, but to reshape a spirit of timidness and remake our family shield. Shield from the land that sought to snatch potential from the womb. Shield from the molesting hand, seeking to permanently entomb. Shield from the man who tells you who you are. And instead of lifting your sights on all to behold, keeps you focused on the scar. Shield from impoverished thinking, abundance is the goal. Shield from the brokenness, a stronghold that exacts its toll. Shield from a mindset already set to fail, because you've not yet seen success from among the place you held. Becoming anything means always overcoming. I wake, often still wondering when life's clock will stop. A preoccupation of sorts with life and death, another optional plot. Though focused on the here and now, memories are constant and tears fall down. My past is still very much afloat. Despite my effort to submerge it, will not drown. It's not sorrow I borrow, just for company's sake. It's a permanence of sadness that comes with trauma that makes it an irreplaceable trait. But sadness isn't the end. There is joy to be had. And I've had plenty of joy being husband, provider, and dad. I've had plenty of joy finding purpose to this life. I'm clinging to the things that matter most, supplanting defeatism with a different host. I often think about you, mother, and wonder if you're proud of the man that I've become today as you watch me through the cloud. As I navigate my way through life, I wonder if it was you who instilled in me a faith so strong and the will to see life through. Here I stand at last, more than twice over a man, with a shield of protection from God above, so the next generation can.
So I don't know what will be read or shared at my funeral, and I don't know exactly when it will be. I don't know when your funeral will be, but I do know one of the things that will be read at yours. That poem, man, is so moving, so real, so tender. I was blown away last night when I read about your mother being included in it. This woman who most of us, if we're honest about it, would feel nothing but disdain for, or at least sadness at best. And you're hoping that she's part of the one cheering you forward from the clouds. Blows me away. You also talked about the tomb. There was a person earlier in your life who tried to entrap you in a tomb, and many of us who've been through abuse, whether it's sexual violence, whatever it might be, live in that tomb for the rest of our lives. So my final question before we shift gears is, for those who are in that tomb today, life hasn't gone the way they wanted. Relationships haven't gone the way they wanted. Finances may not have worked out the way they desired. Health isn't exactly where they wanted. It just hasn't worked, man. Whether it's due to their own decisions or the decisions pushed upon them by others, they're in a tomb. What's the encouragement right now from a man who broke out of his ... What's the encouragement you would give to us?
I think the encouragement is you get the final word. You get to make a choice. You get to take the next step. You get to define whether that tomb is the tombstone of your life or whether it's something else. You get to determine whether you take all of that pain and turn it into a capability. You get to determine how you're going to show up for your family different today than yesterday. You get to show up on and determine how, from a leadership standpoint, you're going to take everything that was meant to hold you back and use it to catapult you and your teams forward. But everything goes back to, what is it that you're supposed to learn? Reframe your thinking. What's the meaning in it? What is it that you are supposed to do? Only you can do for yourself what you can do. Nobody else can do it for you. And you have to draw near to other people who will lift you up, who will pour into you. If it's therapy that you need, do that. If it's new friendships, new relationships, do that. But it all comes back to you and how you think.
Whew, brother, we have been listening to your wisdom, and we are moving closer to the starting line, not a finish line. This is the ... part of the episode. This is when people get to listen to the best of your story and then live it in their own life going forward. This is their life. We remind them of that. So these are called the Live Inspired 7. There's 7 questions that tether all of our mighty guests together. I can't think of an episode that's moved me more, though, than this one. So question number 1 for my friend Orv is, what's been the most impactful book you've ever read?
The most impactful book is Man's Search for Meaning. Yeah, it's top of mind for me. And because it's about finding meaning in every situation. Like, if you don't find meaning in every situation when you're going through, I mean, you can easily be distracted, right. But you've got to focus on a North Star. Like, we all have it. Just determine what your North Star is.
Right.
It's purpose.
What's one positive characteristic that little boy in North St. Louis possessed growing up that you wish you as a man exhibited as brilliantly today?
Imagination. Imagination. When I was that little boy in North St. Louis, I thought I would be Superman. And imagination allows you to stretch the possible. And sometimes you get real comfortable. And even though you say you're stretching, you're not stretching enough. You haven't come to the end of yourself. I had some guys speak into my life this past Sunday, and they said, Orv, you got something. You got to stretch more. Yeah, you're doing, this and that, but you got to get to the end of yourself. You got to stretch, and it requires imagination.
If your home caught fire and all living things are out, you have an opportunity of running back into the home and grabbing one item. What's the one physical thing you'd come racing back out with?
Wow. The one physical thing that I would come racing back out with. So all of my belongings are in the house.
Everything's in there. Your wife, kids, animals, they're out.
Oh, okay.
So the things that matter most are already up, but you got a chance now to grab that little bag, man, and throw one thing into it. What would you put in there?
I'm going to throw my computer bag into it.
A man he's a business leader, man. He's practically running a $3 billion bank.
I want to grab
the laptop.
Look, I'm going to throw my computer bag in there because it's got my photos on it. So this is not the day where, your photos are hanging on the wall. Like, it's got my photos are not backed up.
I have another talk with my buddy Orv after this episode ends about backing it up, dude. If you could sit on a bench on a gorgeous day and have a long conversation with anyone living or deceased, who would you like to be next to?
Wow. Warren Buffett. And the reason for that is I think he's so practical. Like, it's kind of eerie. I mean, like, you read him and you listen to him. I think he is an extraordinary, once in a lifetime kind of human, and he's just practical and seems accessible. Like, and he's a man of many books. So I like that. I'm a thinker, and I like to be around people who are just dropping nuggets and who force me to think deeper.
What's the best advice Warren Buffett or anyone else has ever given you?
Start today. The best time to do anything was yesterday, but just start today.
That's so good for all of us. Whether you want to focus on your faith, your marriage, your singleness, your health, racial inequalities, your spiritual journey, a million things to go do in your life. The time to begin it is right now.
Start today.
What advice would you give your 20-year-old self? This kid barely hanging on with a 1.8 at Mizzou, struggling financially, struggling relationally. What would you say to you?
I was depressed. I would say it's going to be okay. You're going to be all right. Just keep doing what you're doing. Don't give up on life. Because there were those moments where, boy, it was hard. And I just, sometimes the answer is it's easier to just check out.
I'm glad that was not the answer you found, because I know it's a question you asked many times. And the beautiful thing is you aren't alone in asking that. I think every one of us, for the most part, have asked that same question and wondered, is it better if we're not even here? 1.4 million Americans attempted suicide last year. The pandemic is real. So thank you for choosing life and for moving forward. It leads us to question number 7 for my friend, a man I look up to. Or if it's been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence, how would you like yours to read?
Setbacks are inevitable, but failure is not an option.
Orv Kimbrough dealt with setback after setback after setback after setback. And yet for him, through his faith, through his courage, through his zest for life, failure was not an option. Man, I want to thank you for sharing part of your life story with us. Even in the book, you only get up to like age, 27? You're a baby, dude. Can't wait for chapter 2 on this thing to show up, and then for the movie to come up behind it and everything else that is destined to roll out through your life. What a gift it's been to sit next to you.
I'm honored. I'm really honored, brother. I really am. Thank you. Real talk.
My friends, that is the voice and the life story of my brother. His name is Orv Kimbrough. You can learn more about his story at Twice Over a Man. Beautiful book. I highly recommend it. My name is John O'Leary, and today is your day. What a gift. Live inspired.